Hi and welcome to a new video tutorial. In this video we will talk about OpenAI tools for Node.js and TypeScript. In this video we will see how we can set up a tool or a function for OpenAI. We will talk about tool parameters and we will talk about multiple tools. In the end of this video we will have a project called a flight assistant which will take care of asking and reserving for flights. Also, you can check the video outline for chapters. If you want to get the whole code, there's a link to a GitHub repo inside the description. And of course, in order to follow this video, you will need an OpenAI API key and Node.js installed. This being said, let's get started. In this lecture, we will write our first OpenAI tool. Let's get started. And I will create a new folder inside the project. I will call this tools, and right here I will create a new file, an index.ts. And when we want to write tools for OpenAI, there are 4 steps that we need to take. I will write them down. So these are the steps we need to take. First of all, we need to configure our chat tools, and we will make a first OpenAI call. Then we will decide, based on the response that we get from that first OpenAI call, we will decide if we need to call a tool or a function. You know, in this section I will call many times tools, many times functions. Basically they are the same. In the documentation, in the previous versions of the OpenAI API, tools were called functions, so this is the reason. Then we will invoke the tool and then we will make a second OpenAI call with the response. Let's get started. First of all, we need to import OpenAI from OpenAI and we need a client. Then we need to call the function, and I will wrap this inside an async function. So here I'll say async function call OpenAI. And just like before, first of all, we will need a context. So here I'll say const context. This will be of type OpenAI chat, and the type would be chat completion message param array. This is the type that we want. This will be an array in which we will first of all configure the system role. So the first role will be a system chat completion. No, this is not a function message, a simple message param like this. And now the role can be system. Let's see. Yes, the role can be system. And the content, because inside this initial system message, we will say that I will tell it you are a helpful assistant that gives information about the time of day. Currently, if we call the OpenAI dialog and we ask it what is the time of the day, it will tell us that it can't give us data in real time. But with this entry right here, it will be able. And the second entry will be our query. Let's say I won't use the command line, I won't implement this like we did in the last section. I will simply put my query right here. So the role this time will be user, and we will write our question right here. So the content is what is the time of our day. And now let's see what we get as a response. So here I will say const response is await our OpenAI chat. The create function, just as we did before, the model is GPT 3.5 and I will use the newer one 0613, and the messages is our context like this. Let's see how this is looking at it in the current state. You know, this is the first step. We are making a first OpenAI call. This is the one right here. We should also add some tools later on, but let's see how this is looking currently. So currently, let's see how it is. And here I'll say await call OpenAI with tools, and let's see how this is working. Oh, without the await. All right, let's see how this is working. And in order to run it, I will change this path right here. Now it is tools/index.ts, and let's print out the response. let's print out what we get in this initial call without any function. So here I will say npm start. Alright, it will tell us that it can't give us real-time information. And this is the crucial change that will be implemented with a function call. So let's configure this function call in the next lecture. Let's now configure our tool finally. And what we need to do is inside our request right here, the create request, we will configure a new entry, the tools entry. This is the one, and this is again an array because we can have multiple functions that can be implemented with this. I will start with one, and we will have a time of day function. Let's first write it upstairs, a very basic dump function. I will call this function get time of day, like this, and I will say right here return, let's say that currently is 5:45, like this. It doesn't really matter, we will change it afterwards. Let's say that the current time of day is 5:45. Now we have the entry for tools. So the type of this is function. The function entry, let's say it is an object in which we will configure it. So the function needs to have a name, and the name should be the name of our function. So the name of our function is get time of day. I will copy it and paste it right here. It needs to be exact. It has a description, and all these entries will help OpenAI to properly call this function. So I will add this as a description, get the time of day, and basically this is it. We have our function. This is the get of time of day function, and now the OpenAI call should decide if it should call this function or not. So now we should go to the next step of our implementation, decide if tool call is required. So I will copy this comment to know where we are, and go downstairs. Based on the response, we should decide if a tool call is required. And before, inside this create entry, we should also have a new entry. I will call this is the tool choice entry, and I will set this to auto. And this auto call means that the engine will decide which tool to use. Alright, so we are telling OpenAI, hey, you will decide what tool you use, because we can have multiple tools inside our system, as we will see before. So we now should decide if a tool call is required. So let me make some room right here because we will need it. So we want to decide if a tool call is required based on the response. So here I'll say const, I will call this will invoke function, and this is based on the response, the choices of our response, the very first choice, and we have the entry finish reason. This is the one, the finish reason. As you can see in the documentation, it tells us that can be stop, length, or tool calls or function call. This function call is deprecated. Currently we want to know if a tool call is required by this response. So we want to know if the finish reason of this call was tool calls. And now this is a boolean. We want to know if this is like this. This is a boolean. If this finish reason is tool calls, this means that we will be required to invoke a function. And then we need to find out the name of the function that we want. This will be also contained inside the response. So here I'll say tool call is response, again choices, inside the first entry. And now inside the message it should have an entry called tool calls, and we should get the first entry. And since we checked upstairs that this function will be invoked, I'm sure that this is a valid object. Like this tool call is a valid object. To understand this better, I will put a breakpoint right here and run it in debug view, just for you to see how these objects look like. So I will simply run this in debug view like this. And let's observe better the response. If we look at the response, now you'll see the first entry. It has the finish reason, tool calls. So OpenAI understood that we want to call a function, you know, inside the response, even inside the message. It has an entry called tool calls, and the tool calls has a function which has the name getTimeOfDay. So the OpenAI API understood that we want to call a function called getTimeOfDay. So what we need right now, since we decided that we need to call this function, we can simply call it. So let me stop this and make some room again, because we have some code to write. So we now need to call the function. So here I will say if will invoke function. All right, I will say right here const function name, or tool name, tool name. This is our tool call, and then function, and then the name. So now we have the function that we need to invoke. Now we need to check if this is the function that we want. So here I'll say if function name, tool name is our getTimeOfDay. If this is the reason, we now need to call it. So here I'll say const function response, or tool response is our getTimeOfDay. And now with this function, we know the tool response. We now know the time of this. Now what we need to do in order to prevent an error from OpenAI is to add this tool response to our context. So here I'll say context, I will push a new entry, and I will push first of all the message. So here I'll say response choices, the first entry inside the array, and the message. And we will also need to push the other entry. So here I'll say, so I will push two new entries right here. A new entry, which is the type of this entry is tool. The content of this is our tool response, and we still need to have a tool call ID, and this tool call ID is our tool call ID. This is the configuration. I found out that it works with OpenAI. You know, these things always change. It might be changed for you. And now the next step would be to simply call the OpenAI API a second time. So here I'll say const second response is our await, our OpenAI chat completions create, and we want to create a new entry with the same model. The model is again GPT 3.5 Turbo 0613, and the messages is our context. And now let's print the second response. So here I'll say alright, and if everything is alright, we should see a response. I will delete this other entry. Let's see if this is working or if everything is exploding. npm start. So remember, we tell it that it is a assistant that gives us the time of day, and it tells us that it is the evening, especially the early evening. All right, so as you can see, it doesn't just return what we say in the function, it adds its own touch, you know, because it is a assistant which has its own touch, its own specifically take on the response. Let's add a new function in the next lecture, because we are also able to add some parameters to our functions. Maybe I have a database in the background, and I want to I'm an assistant which I'm a chat assistant which returns entries or data about different orders, you know, and the user will tell me an order ID, and I will return back the state of the order. Let's implement this inside the next lecture. In this lecture, we will talk about OpenAI tool parameters. And you saw before, we are able to call functions from our prompts. Let's get to the next level and also call functions with parameters. And let's say we have a database in the back which contains the status of different orders. Well, let's say that we want to interrogate that database using OpenAI. Let's say it opens so much more possibilities. Well, I will create a function, first of all, again, a dump function, but let's pretend that it is a function that accesses a secure database. I'll call this order status, get order status, and this now receives an order ID. So here I'll say order ID. This is of type string, and now I will add a console log to know that we are making the call. So here I'll say, and let me make it a number. So here I'll say const order as number. This is a I will use the parse int function from our order ID, and let's just pretend that we are returning the status based on if the number is odd or even. So here I'll say if the number is even, I will return is in progress, otherwise I will return completed. The big question is now, how will OpenAI understand that we want to extract this order ID from our prompt? First of all, we need to change the system role. So here I will say that you are a helpful assistant that gives information about the time of day and order status. So it knows to look for this order status inside the prompt. Now let's add a new prompt right here. I asked in the prompt, what is the order of status 1, 2, 3, 4? And let's implement now a new tool. So let's add a new tool, again a function. So the type is function, currently the only available type. And let's implement this function description. It will be a little more complex since it has some parameters. Very important, the name is very important because this is the way it will be identified. It is called get order status. Hopefully I don't have any typo. The description, again, very important. And now we will have a new entry called parameters. And this is the new thing regarding to the last lecture. Now we have a new entry called parameters. The type, usually the type can be only, I saw that only object works currently, so I can't have like number or string. Usually this type is object and it works the best. And now let's add some properties. At this point we don't have any content assist from TypeScript, so the properties is our order ID. This is the order ID, and this is an entry which the type is string and the description is, I told it the description is the ID of the order to get the status of. And now one also very important entry is the required. So the required is an array which contains the required parameters for this function. Currently we have this order ID, only order ID. Later on we will see also how we can implement functions with multiple required parameters. But let's now also implement this in the entry will invoke function. Because I'm lazy, I will copy this entry right here and I will add a new entry. This is get order status, and this is two responses, get order status. All right. And now the order, very important, we need to find the entry from the arguments. So if we are using this function which requires arguments, we now need to extract the function arguments from the response. So here I will say const raw argument, because this will come in a raw format, let's say. This is the tool call inside the function entry, and we have the arguments, which is something a string, but we need to parse it as JSON. So here I'll say parsed arguments is our JSON, and we are parsing our raw argument. All right, parsed arguments, and we are getting this. And now this is an any, but it for sure will contain a order ID entry. So I can simply extract this parsed arguments, and here I can say order ID. For sure it will be present like this. And basically we are done. Let's see if this is working. So I will start this again, npm start, and I will ask right here, yes, getting the status of order 1, 2, 3, 4, and it tells us the status of order 1, 2, 3, 4 is currently in progress. Let's add a new another entry right here. Let me add a 5. Let's see what will tell us for the 5. You know, it tells us that the order of the status of this order is 1, 2 is completed. So our function call is working just fine. So basically we covered all that was to cover regarding function calls, but let's implement a more complex project in the next lectures. Let's talk about it in the next lecture. Let's now talk about a project proposal, which I called a flight assistant. Well, basically what we want to implement a dialog in which we can ask for flights between two destinations. The destinations should be by their airport code, just random 3 or 4 letters, doesn't really matter. Then the system will respond back with some flights, maybe 1 or 2 or no flights. If we have flights available, then we can ask back the system, please make a reservation for that flight, and the system should return back a reservation number. To implement this, we will need certain things that we covered until now inside this section and in the previous section. Well, we need a dialog with history. We already did this in the last section. And then we need two tools or two functions. A function which will find flights between an origin and a destination, and a function that will reserve a flight and return back a reservation number if that's possible. If not, it should say that this is not possible. Well, since this implementation will take a lot of time and I don't want to simply add new things, I mean, we have all the things already presented. What this can be a proposal as a project for you. You can implement this as an exercise, and then in the next lecture I will show you the solution, my take on the solution. Maybe yours is different and you can share it in the Q&A section. So as I said, you can pause the course right now and implement this on your own, or you can watch my solution in the next lecture. Let's now analyze the solution I proposed for the assignment in the last lecture. Well, we want a system that will get the available flights and make some reservations. Well, first of all, I implemented some dummy function, which is called getAvailableFlights, and it receives a departure and a destination and returns a string array. I put some if and else's right here. For example, if I have a SFO right here or LAX, I will return 2 destinations. Otherwise, I will return 1 destination. Otherwise, I will return a longer destination, you know, just to play around. The other function receives a flight number. The reserve flight receives a flight number and returns back a reservation number or a string which says fully booked. Well, if the flight number is equal to 6, so we have like a longer flight number, you know, just as a dummy implementation, I will return back a confirmation number. Otherwise, I will say fully booked. These are just dummy functions. Let's see the real implementation right here. So first of all, we are starting with an object, which is the context or the history. Maybe context is better. I will rename this to context. So we have a context object which starts with the system role, and I say as a system role that it is an assistant that gives information about flights and makes reservations. Now we are calling the OpenAI Chat Completions API with 2 tools. We have 2 functions. One function is called getAvailableFlights, and it does what I said it does. It has 2 properties, a departure and then a destination, and both are required inside the function implementation. Then we have a second function which is called reserveFlight, and again this one receives a flight number and will return back a reservation or a string that says fully booked. Alright, now the function will be just like this. I called this willInvoke function, and then here we are trying to see if the finished reason of this initial call is tool calls, and then we can simply see if this is the tool calls. We can call one of the 2 functions, the getAvailableFlights or the reserveFlight, just like we did in the previous lectures. In the end, lower down the line, I'm putting this function inside a process standardin add listener, you know, so we can have a meaningful dialogue inside the console. Let's see how this is working. Of course, this is available as a resource for you if you want to check this implementation. So I will call npm start and I will ask it, are there flights between SFO and LAX? Let's see what it will say. Yes, it tells me that there are 2 flights, just like I implemented in the function, the UA123 and the AI456. Then I will tell it, please make a reservation for the second flight. And OpenAI will be smart enough to know that this is the second flight. Let's see, I hopefully smart enough. Yes, it will make a reservation for this second flight. So it understood this natural language from this prompt, and it understood to make this reservation. And it will tell me back, your flight with number has been successfully reserved. Alright, it even knows the reservation number. It remembers it from the previous dialogues. It knows that it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Alright, let's ask some other destinations which will receive another entry, you know, the negative outcome. I put just some random letters right here, and it tells me that it couldn't find any flights. And basically this is the way it is working. You can play around with this solution. I saw that the results are not always the same, and the reason for that is that we can play around with the temperature of the call. If for the first call I set up the temperature to be 0, I didn't set it up the same way for the second call, but we can play around with the temperature and see how exactly OpenAI will change the output of the chat. So in this section we saw how we can work with OpenAI tools.